everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers on Their Own Words, where every show I talk to writers from across the literary spectrum about their work and how they do what they do. From huge New York Times bestsellers on occasion to folks just getting their work out there for the first time, and really everything in between. The Open Mic is about and for writers and the experience of writing and publishing here in the modern age. For those of you who don't know, the show is available by the same name on both YouTube and via all of the major podcast platforms. And you can subscribe to either or both, which I would love, so you never miss a thing. And if you do subscribe, or even if you don't, please leave me a nice review because it helps people find the show. And when they find the show, they find a lot of great advice and thoughts coming from some of the really good writers out there in the world right now, including my guest today, who, if you have been following the show for a while, you know she's a familiar face here, and for good reason. I don't like to use the word prolific because that makes it sound like people just crank out stuff. And Lisa de Nikolits, you definitely do not just crank out stuff. You are one of the more interesting, eclectic, and consistent in the best possible way that I could mean that, authors I know. You are joining us, of course, today from your home in Toronto. How, everyone? Lisa de Nikolits. We're going to talk with her about her new book, Everything You Dream Is Real. Lisa, it is always a joy to welcome you to the Open Mic. How are you doing today?
I'm very good, Rich, and thank you very, very much for having me. And yes, thank you for distinguishing between the prolific. I would say I'm more sort of like one of those one of a kind artists, you know, when you go to the one of a kind show, because to me, prolific is almost like you have a formula and then you follow it, and you know, it's a successful formula that works for you. And I really admire people who can do that, and I wish that I had that formula, but I don't, because new ideas are constantly popping up, and they come to me from the social environment. They come to me from the things that are happening in the world or to people around me. And so around those ideas, I create one of a kind books. And for example, it was never my intention to write science fiction or speculative fiction, but then that just came along, and I was like, okay, so I see it as a challenge, and I try and rise to it. So thank you. Yes, this is book number 11. So we are sort of trundling along, and we have book number 12 scheduled for 2024. A very different book. That one is actually I'm calling it a modern day noir caper with villains of old and a quietly kick-ass heroine. So it's really something very, very different. So thank you for picking up on that, because I always think that maybe people think I'm just sort of knitting the same scarf or something, but that's not
Oh,
the truth.
no, don't think that, people. And you know what? I will ask you more about the new book. I actually, I think I want to chat to you in a little bit about some of your previous books, of which I've read. I haven't read all your books. I've read about maybe half of them now. But let's talk about Everything You Dream Is Real. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see behind Lisa and right in front of you now a copy of the book. And also in the very back of the room, the poster for The Rage Room, which Everything You Dream Is Real is the follow-up to The Rage Room. So in a way, we're talking maybe about both these because the characters, of course, are consistent between the two. And you're right, this was the most unusual, and again, I mean this in the best way possible, the most different, the biggest variation from the themes of your writing that I had read, though not completely. You have No Fury Like That was a book that also had elements similar, right, of time and space, I should say, that maybe were different. But Everything You Dream, and I think I said this in the blurb I gave you, was like you came out of the starting gate at Mach 2 and you never slow down. It is a fast paced, constantly changing roller coaster across all kinds of, again, time and space and characters. And I loved it. I thought it was great. It was well, I almost said something that I probably shouldn't say. It messed with my mind. I almost used the term that YouTube would probably not appreciate. So I'll just say it messed with my mind a little bit. And I found it fascinating. The same way I found the Rage Room fascinating. So I've now talked about the book. You talk about the book. For those, again, who are maybe the uninitiated, tell us a little bit about Everything You Dream, and maybe connect it with Rage Room and why you even decided to do a sequel, or if that was always the plan.
It was never the plan, but the thing was, the Rage Room, as indicated by the name, the Rage Room had Sharps Barkley, and Sharps was an angry man. And Sharps didn't behave very well, as we know, in the Rage Room. And I felt like there was more to Sharps. I felt like I really needed to give him the opportunity to redeem himself because I liked him. I really, really liked him. And also, I don't want to, give away any spoilers, but the situation that he was left in the Rage Room was my own personal nightmare. So I had to get him out of there. And I also had all these ideas for all the things that could have happened to the other characters. There were so many other secondary characters. I'm a person who really loves my secondary characters, and sometimes if I feel like they didn't get enough of a spotlight in a novel, I'd like to explore them later on. And in this novel was particularly one of those. And so I felt like I had unfinished business, and I felt like it was such a playground for I'm a great fan of Harry Crews. If I could maybe be anybody reincarnated, I would like to be Harry Crews. And so I kind of thought to myself, what would Harry Crews do with a sequel? And I thought he would do something really wild. Somebody mentioned that an editor felt that she thought that Everything You Dream Is Real was a cross between Mad Max Fury Rose and everything and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And that just delighted me because they're two of my favorites. And I thought, yes, because it is crazy. My concern was that it might be too much for the reader. But then again, I had that concern with No Fury Like That. I nearly didn't submit it to my publisher because it had magical realism elements where, a woman is killed and she wakes up in purgatory and she has the opportunity to reassess her life and she's at a crossroads and she can make the choice. And I thought that people would get to the point of purgatory and go, oh, don't be ridiculous. But that is one of my most embraced books. It was translated into Italian, and people still to this day tell me that Fury was one of their favorites. And while I'm really happy about that, then I'm always, feel about, well, what about my other children? Because I feel like they're all in the playground, and then, maybe I want them to be liked as well. Like you always want all your little offspring to be loved, and of course they can't be equally loved because they're so very, very different. But it was an opportunity to have an extreme amount of fun. And as you know, Rich, I'm a person with an insane imagination, sometimes to my detriment. If I tell you that everything that I dream can actually be terrifying, and that if I were to actually put them in the book, it would turn into worse than a Stephen King horror movie. My imagination is absolutely, but it was really fun to, for example, the killer robots that are in the book. Like that was such fun to come up with. I was like, okay, try and come up with something different. So it's a game your mind can play. And then you're like, maybe that. No, it's extremely entertaining. And I have a very visual mind. I see it almost as I see a big screen almost to the side as I'm writing. And I imagine these creatures and the scenarios and stuff. So I thought it was a lot of fun. And I also felt that it was a positive novel. And I felt that it had a lot of love stories. It had, love stories for different ages. We had Sharps and Shasta, they were in their 30s. We had Mother and AP, and they were in their 70s. And I wanted to show that there's love at every age and there's romance at every age. And so that was really important to me too. I wanted people to feel like, especially coming out of COVID, that anything was possible and that good things were possible.
Well, and you mentioned those characters. that They're they're also incredibly diverse because so often, we when we write fiction, and this me too, we tend to write, our characters the way that they cast cop shows on TV. Because if you watch a cop show on TV, the one thing you might take away from it is that every single cop, male or female, is gorgeous. They're always fabulously beautiful people because that's so real, right? They are always, every cop I've ever met looks like, a Vogue model, of course, right? Uh, one thing I've always really appreciated about your writing is you have a real breadth of diversity in your characters. And you have some characters that you physically describe, they're really not attractive, right?
No,
And certainly in our traditional way we're looking at physical attractiveness and that kind of thing, but you give them depth, you give them character, you give them thought, and you put them in positions where they're having romance, or they're having the kinds of roles that are so often reserved only for the most beautiful of our characters. I don't know if that makes any sense to you at
no.
all. I've said it, but that's what I certainly noticed it in the Rage Room and in Everything You Dream.
And to me, in fact, that's why I turned the whole Barbie doll thing completely on its head, because I really wanted to turn that around. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I collect Barbie dolls. I'm a fan of them. Well, I collect all kinds of dolls, let's be honest. I find dolls just completely fascinating and fun. But I really wanted to actually take that myth of the Barbie doll, and then I wanted to reverse it, and that was really important to me to do in the book, because I wanted to turn that on its head. So that was also one of my favorite scenes, when the Barbie doll wives have this revolt, and everything goes quite wild with them. So I thought that was kind of funny.
Oh yeah, oh absolutely. And you mentioned No Fury Like That. One of the and when I talked about you being prolific, that's why I really wanted to qualify that. I think one of the struggles, and I know we've talked about this before, but I think it's really always worth bringing up, especially if anyone is listening or watching this and they're new to this game. And if you think about genre in particular, there are so many goddamn rules that you feel you have to follow, right? And there's all the advice that you get is about following these rules, and I get it, but I love finding authors that don't follow the predetermined rules, and they don't care that their last book was maybe in this genre, because now I have an idea, I want to do this. And so that's why I was just going over in my head, I've read 7 of your books now. So like I said, just about half, and every one of them is completely different from, even Everything You Dream is different in many ways from The Rage Room, even though it's the follow-up. Really talk to me a little bit about that willingness to make each book completely different without being, feeling compelled to try to stick into a genre somewhere.
Well, I think I'm incredibly blessed, because I've been with Inanna Publications since 2009, and they have faith in me and my books. And so, whatever it is that I pop up with, they are so supportive. I think if I had published with one of the bigger publishing houses, they would have wanted a formulaic novel, and they would have wanted sequels, and they would have wanted the same characters, and they would have wanted it, as I say, to follow a formula. And if you publish with an indie publishing press, you have a lot more freedom. And I'm in the process of preparing a bunch of talks that I'm going to be doing at the Toronto Public Libraries. And one of the things that I'm pointing out to aspiring writers is this: be very clear on what your goals are. Now, if you want to be a writer who writes the things that matter to you or occur to you in your head, then probably you might not end up with one of the big five, because they're not going to allow you that level of freedom. Inanna Publications are incredibly supportive of my creative process, and they fully embrace what I do and support me in every single way. So when I come up with an idea, I'm not shackled by my agent won't like this, my publisher won't like this. I have the freedom to really just follow that and then say to Inanna, this is what I've got, which is not to say that Inanna just goes like to everything I do, oh, that's marvelous. They send me back to the drawing board many a time because, they're like, this is unresolved, this doesn't make sense. So they make me work extremely hard. They give me the freedom in concept and genre, but of course they want the books to be a certain quality. And, so I have to go back and work really hard. And sometimes with the feedback, I'll go back to my desk and I'll think, I can't do this. I can't do this. But then I have a new little motto thing. You know me, Rich. Usually I'm flashing my little sporting analogies. You miss the goals you don't kick. So I have this one that I wanted to show you. And it said, I will meditate and then destroy you. And what I meant by that is, like, when I'm facing a book that I'm really struggling to rewrite because I've gotten the feedback, or I've worked with an editor and they're like, we need to move this from here, we need this, you need to delete this character, now you need to develop this character, your timeline is completely, shot to hell in a handbasket and you have to rework it. And it's so daunting. And you think to yourself, well, I can't. That's always my first reaction. I just can't do that. Like, it's too much. And then I think to myself, I will meditate and then I will destroy it, because the only way I can go about it is with single minded focus and almost aggression. And usually I eat a lot of chocolate along the way to fuel me as well. And I'm a great believer in letting your subconscious think about something. So, firstly, I will read an analysis of what's required of me. Then I'll panic. Absolutely. There's complete panic. Then there's despair because I think I can't do it. And then I think, okay, I'm just going to meditate on it and let my brain figure it out. Give it a moment, and then something will go. Usually I'll be in the bath, which is really annoying because you're like, okay, I'm just going to be zen, have a bath. Then you like pling, this idea comes up to leap out the bath, water everywhere, what a mess. But you have to get, yeah, you have to get that thought down before it, flees, and then off I go. And then I literally, it's almost like a martial art, which I've gone back to. It's like now I'm on the mat and I'm going to keep doing this until I get this movement right. I often because actually I've gone back to karate after 34 years, which is a really long hiatus. And I didn't think I'd ever be able to go back. So going back is quite miraculous and I love it. I love it to pieces. I was a brown belt 34 years ago, 35 years. And recently I've regained my brown belt, which is to me, again, one of those things that shows me anything is possible in life. But a lot of times in the dojo, we'll be sparring or be doing something. And the other karateka will say to me, like, hey, just chill, relax. We're here to have fun. And I'll say to them, but this is me having fun. Me being in the zone, utterly focused, thinking about the next thing. I'm not there to kind of laugh and kind of joke around, whatever. I'm there to learn this movement. And so I apply that to the book writing as well. I'm very single-minded and I'm really boring because it consumes me. And I'm not a very interesting person to be a friend with because other people are talking about the world and their lives and stuff, and I really try and pay attention and things they've watched on TV and stuff, but I'm just thinking about my book. So
Well, you know what though? I do think there's something really interesting there in that I think creative people, and I like to include myself in this too, need outlets other than their main source of creativity. Now, you're a creative person by trade as well. You do design. You've done this for a very long time. I know for me, I get away with my dogs, and I will go hiking and go places where there's no other humans, so I'm very extroverted, as my wife would attest. But I find the older I get, the more and more I prefer to have more and more time to myself. So, and that's because I think that's where a lot of my creativity formulates in my head. For you, it sounds like it might be the bathtub. For me, it's out on trails where I don't have a phone ringing and no one's emailing me, and I don't have anybody, cluttering up my brain with all the needs that they have of me. So that's where those storms settle out, and I get clarity, and then I can come home and I can apply all that stuff with clarity. It sounds like for you, it's, that's what martial arts gives you. It gives you a place, almost like a venting place, or something that allows you to take the focus off the creativity for a second, refocus it in another area of creativity that then allows you to come back and focus even harder on the original place of creativity. I'm not sure there's a question there other than,
well, I think it's a
with you, and talk a little bit about how you use these side areas to help your creativity.
And you raise such an interesting point, because it's so important to acknowledge to yourself, are you an introvert or are you an extrovert? Because that really, if you know what kind of person you are, then it's really helpful. Now, this may sound kind of odd because I may seem like an extrovert. People always think I'm an extrovert, but I'm not. I'm an introvert. And so when I go to karate and I'm on the mat, that is when I can be my most introvert self. And that's why it's so peaceful to me, because I'm training with other people, but it's really just me. And I'm really then at one with myself, inside my body, inside my head. And it's such a moment of actual pure introversion. And I think that that's what really helps clear my brain. So it's very interesting that you point that out, because Rich, for me, if I have too many like social engagements, or even work meetings or things like that, I'm happiest when I'm actually designing behind my computer, instead of being part of setups where there's a lot of personalities involved. I'm better when I'm writing by myself as opposed to workshops. I get fragmented if there's too many people and things going on. So I think as well, for like would-be writers, or even people who maybe feel like they're currently stuck at the moment and they're not quite sure why they're stuck, maybe do a little sort of self recalibration and alignment, like, who am I and what actually feeds my creativity? And it doesn't matter what people are saying. It doesn't matter if, Marie Kondo says clear things out. I'm not a minimalist. I'm a clutterist, as you can probably see behind me. And that feeds my soul. So find out what feeds your soul. It doesn't matter what other people are saying or what's trending. And then that will be the most helpful thing that you can do, I really think.
Yeah, and creativity is very subjective anyway, and certainly the response to creativity is all over the map. And I do think a lot of it's hard not to maybe get caught in chasing trends or chasing whatever's hot or what have you. I mean, the one thing I think we all know, if you're in it, is that by the time you've accomplished that thing that's whatever the trend now, the trend has shifted. So that's a waste of time anyway. But I do find the older I get, the more important it is for me to find that place of centering. So I find it interesting that for you, even though you stepped away from it for all those years, that you could step back into it and find that it still gives you that. And it has a benefit on the things you're doing in your life now, because the thing that didn't change in all that time is the need to be creative.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, I got really lucky, when I phoned the dojo and I was completely freaked out and could I do this and stuff. And so I said to the sensei, I said, thing is this, I said really hesitantly, because at the time I said, I am 55. And she laughed and she said to me, I'm 77. And she is the most Sensei Bernice, and she's really helping me with areas in my life. She'll say to me, like, relax your body. Like, I always thought that I had to, that sparring came from a position of being really wound up and ready to attack. But actually, the best comes from being completely relaxed and then that fast movement. And so, and it's the same with the writing. I always felt I had to be ever vigilant, like super vigilant to the point of exhaustion. And that is exhausting. And Sensei Bernice will say to me, you exhaust yourself with your worry. So I'm finding that, working with her is really helping me, like emotionally and psychologically in other areas too. And yeah, I mean, 77. And in fact, she just had her 78th birthday and she's just incredible. And I'm like, well, this is inspiring. I can be on the mat when I'm 78, hopefully, and that would be very cool.
I want to talk a little bit about characters and
Yes.
characterization. Now, you, in your life, you've lived around the world. I think anyone listening probably could tell that you are from South Africa, but you lived in Australia and Canada. I'm sure I've missed some. Did you live in England too?
I lived in London, England,
Yeah.
yes, but it was
So,
only for 4 months or so, so it wasn't a long time, but it was a long
but
enough
you've
time to
been
realize, yeah.
you have had the opportunity to live abroad from your home country for years. Your books reflect that. You have books set in South Africa, set in Australia, set in Canada, and one of the things that fascinates me is that all of those characters that you create have distinction of place, and yet they're very unique, but they have, and some of them are really good folks and some of them are really bad. I'm thinking of Rotten Peaches. I
So bad.
There's no again, I love the fact that you're not linear in that regard. So that's a lead into just saying you really do create a lot of unique characters, and you've managed to create a lot of unique characters. Not just, it's easy to create characters who are basically, like when we talk about genre fiction, I shouldn't say easy, but when you have characters in a series that are all based in one place, you can develop those people based on place and on time. You can evolve them however you want to, because they're going to essentially continue to be the same thing. You create new ones every time, and the sense of place is different, and the sense of the circumstances are different, and their backstories and everything that makes the place unique is also in them. That's a hell of a heavy lift. You do it almost every time, and you do it really, really well. Again, long lead in there, but tell me how you approach developing this crazy spectrum of characters.
Well, the answer to that is going to sound pretty crazy, and it ties back into the dreams. Here's what happens. Something, as I'm about to fall asleep at night, okay, this is really going to sound one flew over the cuckoo's nest, and people are going to be like, okay, it's time to get the medics at the door. I see faces as I'm falling asleep, and these faces are so vivid, and they are definitely not faces I've seen anywhere. It's not people I've seen on the subway. It's not somebody I've seen in a crowd. And it's almost like they pop up in front of my face and they linger there for a moment and then off they go. And I have this theory, because I'm quite mystical. I feel like somewhere out there, there are all these people, And maybe they didn't have a shot at being a hero or some like a person who had a moment in this world. And maybe they knock on the door of my brain and say, hey, what about me? And then, of course, I do a lot of research. I do a lot of research into what that time would be, or what they would have been working at, or what their lives would have been like. But they come along and they show themselves to me. And sometimes, if I'm stuck for a character, I'll just kind of sit for a moment. And it also brings me back to the dolls, because sometimes I'll see like a vintage doll and I'll think like, who held this doll? Or if it's like an adult doll, maybe I can turn her into a character, and who is she? Or if I go to an antique show and I'm looking through all the old black and white photographs of the men, the women, the children, I think, what happened to them and what were their lives like? And then I try and build it from there. So Rich, at any given time, there's a lot of people in my head.
Well, so I'm going to throw some esoteric kind of stuff at you here. Questions you may not be able to answer. So are you
Yes,
up for the challenge?
yes.
What's your favorite one of your own books?
Oh, my favorite book, The Nearly Girl.
Ah, I like that one too. I really like that one too. I'll tell you my favorite of yours. I still think it's a hard one, but I really like No Fury Like That.
Oh, good. I mean,
I
that's
love that book.
the funny thing is, I really worried that people would find Julia so angry. And so when I put the book out into the world, I was prepared for people to say, like, we can't bear the protagonist. And then people loved her. And I was like, well, because
The
I'll
Nearly
be
Girl
honest.
though too. The Nearly Girl though too. Again, those are probably. I don't. God, I really like Rotten Peaches too. I like I said, I loved your books, but I think those books for whatever reason, No Fury resonated in my head for some reason in a way that maybe some of the other ones didn't quite.
Well, you know what someone said to me about Fury? She said to me, it was so funny. And she said, if you can do that level of humor in all your books, it would be great. And I said to her, well, I wish I could, but like, I can't, because the books are what they are. So I can't force anything. And that book, so I mean, in that book I wrote because I'd been let go from my job that I loved. And Rich, I wrote that book in 12 days. So No Fury Like That was me, like writing with fury. And
Yeah.
and that's what came out. And I knew that if I left it and came back to it, that I wouldn't recapture that level of fury that I was feeling. And so maybe it was that. Maybe it was that, I literally sat at my desk for 12 days and lived on chocolate and coffee and wrote the thing. It was crazy, but it was fabulous.
I've always been fascinated to some extent by stories around purgatory anyway, but
Yeah.
I loved the way that one. I loved the ending. I loved the way it came back at
Yeah.
the end.
Mm.
I'm a big believer in redemption as a
Yeah.
theme, a very consistent theme in all of literature. I mean, almost every story
Yeah.
is really a story of redemption in some way or
Yeah.
another, right? Almost every one. And I liked the redemption in that story. And I don't want to spoil it for anybody.
No,
So I'll
it's
just
true. And
keep
I
talking
was,
to myself. But
yeah, like I just say this, that every single time I read the last page of No Fury Like That, I cry. I literally cry. It just, and none of my other books do that. Like when I read the ending, I'm like, oh, that's really good, or I'm, happy about that. But something about the last paragraph of No Fury Like That makes me cry every time. Isn't that crazy?
well, I mean, books are an emotional exercise, right?
Yeah.
So along those lines, and this is again, you may not be able to answer this. Which of your books do you wish you would have had another crack at because you would wish you could do it differently?
Oh, that's a really good question. Let me think about that.
I
You
mean, and
know,
I ask because like I have a good friend who does nonfiction, does
yeah,
biographies. He can readily point to 2 books that he did because he had a contract.
Yeah.
He just had to get them done.
Yeah.
Neither was the level of research and everything that he normally does, and they're fine, but they're not his best work.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't even like to claim those books anymore. Do you have a book where you go, if I was going to do that book now, I'd do it so much better?
The Witch Doctor's Bones. You know what the thing is, Rich? I put too much into that book. That was one of those books where I left my day job and I was going to write the perfect genre novel. I was going to write like an Agatha Christie type murder mystery set in Africa. The thing was, I loved the book so much. I over researched it, I over embellished it. My heart was too much in it. You know, the initial draft of that was 230,000 words. I mean, that's yeah.
Yeah, that's a little Gone with the Windish. I could see a publisher going, "What?"
Well, you know, they read it. Yeah, they still, to their credit, they read it. And then they sent me back, I think, and that was one of the ones where I thought I can't do it. And they sent me like a blueprint of what I had to do. And I really, really did my best with it. And I'm still proud of it and I still love it. But I feel like if I were to redo it, I would do it differently. I would cut a lot of it out. I would make it sharper. I would literally, as they say, kill a lot more of my darlings. I think because it was a book about Africa that I'd always wanted to write, it meant too much to me and I was too personally involved.
Yeah. I'm reminded too, I really like Between the Cracks She Fell too. So that might be like a 1 and a 1A with no those. And for some reason, I don't know, maybe I'm a weird guy. I don't know. I like stories with strong female characters. And I don't have a real reason for that. In fact, I'm not sure I've really thought about it till just recently, but I know in my own writing, I think I try really hard to, we always try to avoid cliches and tropes and things like that. But I think I work maybe a little harder with female characters. And it's because I like to read strong female characters who are not stereotypical either. And, again, I think most of your books, I think, have strong lead female protagonists. And it's just enjoyable stuff for me. So I really like those books too. Well, let me ask you about the new book you're working on. I know you probably can't say too much about it, but you alluded to it earlier. So let's go back to it. Tell me a little bit, whatever you can, about the new book and what you're thinking with it.
So Mad Dog and the Sea Dragon was actually supposed to come out before the Rage Room. So, it had been accepted by Inanna. It was scheduled for publication. And then what happened was I wrote the Rage Room. And so then I said to Luciana, I feel like we need to do the Rage Room first because it's so timely I feel like if we wait with the Rage Room, that the technology, the world building, all of this will become outdated. And so she was really very lovely. She's like totally fine. So we moved Mad Dog. And then, of course, I came up with the sequel, and I'm like, well, I really feel like the sequel should follow while the Rage Room is hot. So poor old Mad Dog got bumped. But Mad Dog was really, really fun to write. And actually, what I'm doing now is I'm rewriting it. I'm completely going through it because it's been a while since I've seen the novel, and I feel like I've improved, and everything that I've learned along the way, even since then, I'm applying to the book. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the photographer Ouija. He was, back in the 50s. He covered the crime, very graphic photographs, very graphic crime photographs of mob hits and things like this. He was a marvelous photographer, did a lot of other stuff. And we went to see an exhibit of Ouija, who had always been a fan of. And there was a picture of Mad Dog, and the caption read, "Mad Dog snarling as he's led away." And I'm like, oh my God, Mad Dog is so cool. So the thing was, at that point, because I belonged to a collective, the Madames of Mayhem, and we were writing, I forget which anthology it was, but I came up with a short story. It was Mad Dog and the Sea Dragon. And I'd also made a trip to the Ripley's Aquarium where I'd seen a sea dragon and I fell so in love. A sea dragon is like, it's like a seahorse, but it's a seahorse in a wedding dress. It's the most beautiful thing in the whole world. So I had Mad Dog in my head. I had the sea dragon. And then I had the idea for this protagonist that actually came from something when I was really young. I had this friend. We were very young, 7 or 8, and we loved dressing up in like vintage clothes that we could find, and we pretended we were from another era. And then I thought, what if someone continued that into this day and age? What if maybe they'd suffered some sort of trauma, and so this was a balm to their soul, and this was where they escaped. So then we had the protagonist, who is this person, Jessica, and then we have the modern day gangster, who's basically Mad Dog in modern day form, and then she had to have a leafy sea dragon. So these were quite interesting aspects to bring together, but really, really fun. So it's a crime novel, and it's more so there's no magical realism in this one. It's just a straight story. And I'm finding it just a delight. Like, I'm really loving it. I'm going through the line edits and looking at it and seeing where I can develop the characters, etc. And just having a marvelous time. And it's actually really refreshing to go back to something of this kind after Rage Room and Dream, which were speculative fiction and fantasy, and to be grounded in the real world back again. Because I have another book that I'm thinking about after that. And the thing was, Rich, I was writing that book, which is called The Bag Lady of Borrowed Luck. And I felt like, you know what, this is feeling too everything you dream is real to me, and I don't want that. So then I thought, well, what if I go back to Mad Dog, and it's almost like it'll push a reset button in my brain. And that's exactly what's happening, which is wonderful. I mean, that's another tip I find for, aspiring writers. Don't just stick on one thing, write different pieces, because it all contributes to a bigger picture and helps it. To me, doesn't fragment. It helps, expand your thinking and creativity, I think.
Absolutely. Well, I don't want to keep you forever. I've loved, of course, talking about Everything You Dream and all the other books. I'm looking forward to the new one. I'll be reading that one as soon as it's available. So next year I'll definitely be on it. But you also know I always like to end with my question. I'm gonna give you 3 options of someone I could put you together with for dinner, drinks, conversation, whatever it is you want. And I'm going to give you the all Margaret version. I've never done this before, so this is the first time. I'm going to give you 3 Margarets, and you tell me which of these Margarets you would want to spend a little time with. I'm going to give you Margaret Thatcher, of course, former Prime Minister of England, the great writer Margaret Atwood, or the great Margaret Trudeau. I suppose maybe somebody might think she's great. Anyway, Margaret Trudeau. You have 3 Margarets there. Which one would you pick and why?
Very interesting, because Margaret Trudeau's life is so fascinating, and she is so fascinating, and the things she's overcome have been so fascinating. Then we have Margaret Atwood, who is just, Margaret Atwood. And then we have Margaret Thatcher. And you know what? I'm going to choose Margaret Thatcher. And the reason is this. I would be terrified of Margaret Atwood. I actually, if I were to ever meet Margaret Atwood, I would I would probably say something completely incoherent and extremely strange, and then she would just, think, what was that? And I think that if I were to meet, Margaret Trudeau, we'd have a fine old time of it. But I think then I would really like to get to understand Margaret Thatcher. I feel like she's such a complex villain, and I'm going to say that villain. And so I feel like and actually, now that you mention it, there is the Mad Dog's mother in Mad Dog and the Sea Dragon is Grace, and she's from Britain. And I have her with this, killer British accent, but she wears these black gloves just before she kills people. And maybe there's some sort of unconscious channeling of Margaret Thatcher and the power there. So it's fascinating that you raised that, Rich, actually, because I had sort of aligned her, with the former queen, the late queen, but actually the queen was really a nice person. And this person, Grace, I'm not sure if Grace is the right name, that may need to be reworked. I was just thinking about this the other day. I thought, but the queen is really nice. And this Grace is really not. So maybe I'm gonna actually explore the Margaret Thatcherism of her. So Rich, thank you.
Hey, there you go. There you go. So you never know where a creative spark might come from. You never know.
Exactly.
Keep your mind open. It's like they always say, you learn a lot more with your ears open and your mouth closed.
Exactly.
Open your mind too. You never know what might happen. Well,
I
Lisa, as
love
always, very fascinating conversation. I could talk writing with you for hours on end. It never gets dull to me. You're a fascinating person. Your writing's fascinating, and I always appreciate you taking some time to come on the show, talk about your latest work. And I really encourage everybody, if you haven't discovered Lisa's work, check it out. It's definitely worth your time to look into her wide array of very unique novels, short stories. We haven't even talked about short stories. Maybe sometime in the future we'll do a whole show. We'll just talk about the art and craft of the short story. That gives us something to look forward to for the next time, because we have to talk before 2024 anyway. We'll have to figure that one out. So anyway, thank you so much, Lisa, for coming on the show and talking about your work and about writing.
Oh, Rich, I thank you very, very much. And thank you to everybody listening. And thank you for taking the time, and keep writing and keep reading.
Absolutely. Well, until then, this has been Rich Eisen for my guest, Lisa de Nikolits. And I will remind you again, please hit subscribe if you haven't. If you are so kind to leave me a nice review, I'd really appreciate that. It helps other people find the show and get what I like to think is some really great advice from a lot of really great writers who have, this publishing's hard, and it's confusing, and it's lonely, and you can spend a lot of money on craft books. And I always say, why do that? Just come here and listen to people tell you exactly how things are working. And I think that's a much better way to go. The last thing I'll leave you with is the same thing I always leave you with. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us, so please make the day count. Until then, I'm Rich Eisen. This has been The Open Mic.